The value of EU trade through free trade agreements with global partners surpassed 2 trillion euros for the first time in 2022. That's according to the third annual report on the implementation and enforcement of EU trade policy published last week. The European Commission report shows that trade with their top 20 trade agreement partners grew by close to 30% on average in 2022. The Commission, working with member states and EU businesses, also broke down over 30 barriers to trade in 19 countries. Tackling barriers over the last 5 years helped unlock 7 billion euros of EU exports in 22 alone. The agreements have also delivered stronger protection of the environment and labor rights. The EU has the largest network of trade agreements in the world, with a total of 74 countries accounting for 44% of all EU trade. In 2022, trade between the EU and its trade agreement partners, excluding energy products, outgrew EU trade with all other partners. And these deals have helped sustain trade and investment in a difficult global business environment characterized by growing geopolitical challenges such as Russia's aggression against Ukraine. And trade agreements continue to deliver economic growth and more resilient supply chains. And they did that by opening new export opportunities for EU producers and farmers. For example, under the respective trade agreements, EU exports in pharmaceuticals to Vietnam increased by 152%, and cars and parts to South Korea by 217%, and EU exports of meat to Canada increased by 136%, and EU services exports to Canada by 54%. And EU trade supports 670,000 SME businesses exporting to third countries. And they did that by making exports more resilient to external shocks. In 22, EU exports of sanctioned goods to preferential partners surged by 174 billion, offsetting by far the 27 billion lost in exports to Russia. And they did that by securing access to important inputs and reducing overdependence on a single country. In the first 5 years of the EU-Canada agreement, EU imports of critical raw materials from Canada rose by 56%, compared to growth of only 25% of these materials from other sources, contributing to the EU strategy to diversify away from Russia. Critical raw materials are essential for the green and digital transformations of the EU economy. And they did that by removing barriers and progressing on disputes. In 2022, the Commission got 31 trade barriers removed in 19 partner countries, and this helps boost EU exports in important sectors such as agri-food, pharmaceuticals, and health and beauty. Examples include the US amending long-standing barriers to the import of sheep and goat products, and Costa Rica removing its decade-long 10% tax on EU-imported beer. And the dispute settlement at the World Trade Organization continued. The EU launched 4 new disputes, including the first ever with the United Kingdom, over a discriminatory subsidy scheme for green energy. This dispute was resolved after only 4 months through mutual agreement. The EU also prevailed in its dispute with Turkey over discriminatory practices in pharmaceuticals and is now monitoring Turkey's steps towards compliance. The EU also made progress on labor and environment issues under those agreements that include a trade and sustainable development chapter. As part of this work, Japan and South Korea ratified core International Labour Organization conventions foreseen in their respective trade agreements with the EU. And deeper engagement with Peru and Colombia has led these countries to launch a revision of their labor codes. And if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.